Hello, I'm here today with Sam Bowman. He's the Deputy Director of the Adam Smith Institute, which is a public policy think tank. We're here today to discuss TTIP, which is a bit of a controversial free trade agreement between the US and the European Union. Can you explain to me how such an agreement could benefit the European Union and, most importantly, the UK?
TTIP is, in theory, a free trade agreement. So one of the things it would do would be to get rid of the last barriers in trade between the European Union and the United States. Now, we don't actually have many of those barriers left, thankfully. We have a few strange barriers. So the US has a 40% tariff on clothes coming from the European Union into the US, but in general, trade is pretty free. Getting rid of those would be good, but the real point of TTIP is for what are called non-tariff barriers. So it's not taxes that we put onto things that we're bringing in, it's difficulties between countries in selling the same good in two different countries. The kind of tangible benefits of getting rid of these, I think, are bigger, because being able to not just buy things from abroad, but sell things that we produce in the US, which is one of the largest economies in the world, would be very beneficial. And the easier that is, the more of our things that we can sell and the more cheaper we can buy things. The 120 billion euros extra for Europe, and I think it's about 90 billion euros extra for the US. They're useful, and they're probably what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about the benefits. I suspect they're a little bit exaggerated, or they're a little bit kind of optimistic, because what they're assuming is that we get rid of half the barriers, of these non-tariff barriers. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think that the political process means that once this starts to go through national parliaments, and once you get big objections from the UK, from protesters in the UK and so on, they will start to make little exceptions. And that's what's happened in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Bill in the US and the Far East. And I suspect we'll see something like that for TTIP as well.
Such a free trade agreement could lead to deregulation of public services such as the NHS. Is that something we should also be worried about, or is that purely a myth?
Healthcare is one of the few areas where pretty much everybody involved has said we're going to have a special clause in the final agreement that exempts healthcare from this. They're already going in saying that public services where governments decide that they want the government to be running things will be completely protected and completely exempted. TTIP's provisions won't, for example, be protected from rubbish collection. So if the government decides that it wants to contract out rubbish collection to a private firm, it takes in lots of different bids from lots of different companies, and it has to weigh them up according to the price and what they're offering and so on, and award it. Now, currently, the UK government or a local council, if it were them, can say, this is a great bid from this American firm, but we're going to go with this British firm because we prefer British firms. And that can be their only reason. What TTIP would do would be to prevent them from making the decision just on that basis. So TTIP basically bans governments from discriminating against foreign firms just because they're foreign.
Some say that they're worried the quality or food safety, for example, could be at risk. I know in the US, for example, poultry is often disinfected with chlorine. I mean, is that something we need to be scared about?
I don't really think we need to worry about a race to the bottom, because one of the points of TTIP is that we'll only have these regulatory harmonizations when governments in both the EU and the US like the regulations in the other sector. So it's not going to say, oh well, the US has much, much lower regulations, therefore we have to lower ours to go down there. It's also not going to say that the US has much higher regulations, so we have to bring our regulations up to go there. It's going to say that in these areas where we do agree that regulations are effectively the same, so chlorinated chicken probably wouldn't be one of those areas, we will say we can mutually recognize, mutual recognition is what I prefer, because it means you can have different regulations and you don't have this harmonization effect, or you can harmonize.
I understand the whole point of this. The only issue is, or that I have with these negotiations around the trade agreement, is that they're not made public. We don't actually know what the trade deal might entail, or what kind of regulations might be realigned on each other or not. I mean, why is there so much secrecy involved?
I think it's a mistake. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Because most international treaties are done in private. Most of the negotiations are done in private because there's all sorts of horse trading that goes on. Nobody likes to see how a sausage is made, and that's kind of how all diplomacy works. I understand the concerns of some activists, but I think they're probably possibly being misled, or they misinterpret what's going on. But until this is out there and until we actually see the TTIP document, it's impossible for people who support TTIP like me, or who think it's probably something that we should support once we see the final thing, to say, hey, look, you're wrong. Look, it's right here in the document. That's key.
In terms of the public or our MPs in Westminster, how much say would they have in this once the documents are published?
Well, once the documents are published, every national parliament is still going to have to ratify it. So the Westminster Parliament is still going to have a vote on it, and it will have to go through in that way. This will still have to go through a huge process once it's made public, and it's very, very possible that it just gets shot down.
For more news on TTIP, please go to our website, IBTimes.co.uk.